Welcome to the Monday Monologue. Okay, I know it's Tuesday, but holiday weekend, so give me a little grace here, right? Anyway, sorry I haven't been posting any videos for the last week or so. Had a major computer meltdown. This is my old motherboard. The RAM died, or one stick did, and started corrupting files, and I didn't really know what was going on, but eventually figured it out. Then I decided this was an almost 10-year-old computer. It's worked really well, but it's like time for an upgrade. So instead of trying to find this dinosaur RAM to replace this bad stick with, I got a new computer, built a Gen 13 i5 with Windows 11 and the whole bit. I don't know if any of you guys have messed with Windows 11, but the issue I ran into was the software, or at least some of the software that I was using, is not compatible. Got some security updates, tried to install the video editing software, and actually computer wouldn't boot up after that, so I had to uninstall it. And so I've been upgrading software, and a little learning curve there, and obviously some time spent uploading and downloading, building, whatever. So anyway, not making big excuses, but that's the main reason I haven't been posting in the last week or so. So anyway, it gave me some time to work on some other projects. One thing I get a lot of messages about is people inquiring, hey, can I buy one of your phono stages? And I know that it's a China board, but I think using this hand selection of components, better capacitors, a nice EI transformer, just the way the whole thing is a much better upgrade to what you can buy off AliExpress or one of those China sites. And so I've decided to finish up a couple of them. I've been selling them locally to friends of mine, and I've been using them for over a year, so I am comfortable that they're reliable. And so I'm finishing up a couple of them that I'm going to put up for sale. One's going to have the gold trim, and one's going to have the silver trim. Haven't decided on the exact price point yet. It's probably going to be around $800 when I think about, the parts are over $500, and then my labor in it to really make it worthwhile. That's kind of the price point they're going to have to sell for. And hey, if they don't sell for that, they're really not worth me doing. So we're going to test the market on that. Also going to be selling some of my other projects that I've done on the channel. The 6LU8, I think I'm going to put that little amp up for sale. It doesn't really fit in with my whole rotation of amplifiers, although it's a really good sounding little amp. I think that's something that'll go up for sale. And I'm going to have to just kind of look through my projects and maybe sell off some other this stuff so I can build new stuff. Speaking of which, got the fab work done on the second chassis for my KT120 build. And I was going to do all this fab work on camera, but this chassis is so nice and was pretty expensive. I didn't want to risk me getting distracted, which you've seen me do, and mess up this chassis and then have to try to replace it. And then the new one might not match this one, and I just didn't want to go there. So I'm going to go over in detail kind of what I did, how I did it, the tools I used, and then we'll be ready to start installing parts in this thing and soldering it together. The other thing is one of the caps inside was rated at 500 volts, and that was kind of pushing what I'm comfortable with, because on boot up it would go past 500 volts. And so I was going to put like this WEMA cap in there, a DC link for that position at the driver tube filtering, and it was really almost too big to fit in there. I couldn't really figure out a good way to solidly mount it. I didn't feel comfortable just double stick taping it to the case, and so I started looking around and found a guy on eBay that sells 33 UF 600 volt electrolytic caps, which will be perfect for this location and situation. So I got a couple of those coming. They put one in each amp. Then all the caps are rated for 600 volts. And the reason I want to do that is I want to experiment with using these little solid state replacements for the rectifier tube. That should jack up the voltage at least another 15 or 20 volts, maybe even more. We'll see. And I think that will push what these things are capable of making power-wise. So if you build these, you can either decide to use a solid state rectifier thing, or you can drop in the 5AR4. If you want to drop the voltage even lower, you could put like a 5U4 in it, and just opens up a lot of options. And once we get these things built, I want to play with putting KT88 tubes in it and see what they make power-wise, and see if we can bias these things down to use EL34 tubes. And I just, think this is really going to be cool. And that brings me to the discussion point today on the Money Monologue is, why don't you sell kits? Why don't you sell fabricated chassis? How much would you charge me for that? And all that kind of stuff. And I want to touch on why I don't do that. For one thing, to sell somebody a complete kit with all the iron and everything, the shipping is going to be insane. You're going to spend $150 probably for me to ship this thing to you. And that then includes having the stuff shipped to me. So you're essentially paying for the shipping for these parts twice. Okay? Then people have asked, well, why don't you just sell like a fabricated chassis with the smaller parts kit? Well, I could do that, but one of the problems I run into is I don't know what iron you're going to end up with. And, you may decide that you want to use a Hammond transformer, or that you want to use an EdCore transformer, or I may drill these things for a certain, iron, and then they are out of stock and they don't have it anymore, or they just quit making it. And so then I've got chassis drilled for iron that is no longer available. The other thing is, like, these chassis were expensive, and they were handmade, I think, by the guy to order. It took me 6 or 8 weeks to get this pair of them. So if you ordered a pair of these chassis for me, and then I have to order somebody else to fabricate these, and then send them to me, and then I have to do all the work on them and then send them out to you, it might take 3 or 4 months for you to get them. And most people aren't going to be happy with that kind of time frame. The other thing is the cost of me doing this fab work. It's going to be expensive, guys. I started on the fab work on this one a couple of days ago, and the first day I spent a solid 4 hours working on just laying everything out, making sure everything was in the right place. So obviously, it's that whole measure twice, measure 3 times before you drill, because who wants to ruin, a $160 chassis? And then when it comes to some of this stuff, it takes hours for me to do it and make sure that I'm not going to screw it up. I don't have a CNC machine. This isn't something where I just stick this top plate in a thing and push a button and it comes out all done. I'm doing this work by hand and laying this stuff out by hand. And I know some of you guys will say, oh, well, you can just print it up, you can lay it out in CAD software, and you can print a sheet out and just lay it on here and all the holes will be things. Well, it's great if you know how to do that. I don't know how to use CAD software. And it would take me, there's a whole learning curve to that I really just don't have an interest in learning how to do. And I'm sure you guys that have learned how to do that, that's great. But I don't. It's like I know how to use Photoshop, but you probably don't. And so, we each have skills in our ways of doing things. But like for drilling the holes out for this KT120 socket with these, I don't know if you can see this, but with these vent holes around it, making sure these 4 holes for the mounting ring or the dress-up ring is in the right place, and all that's going to be centered and everything. I spent about 3 hours doing that. And then I'm sure folks are going to say, well, that's ridiculous. It shouldn't take you that long. Well, great. If you can do it faster, why are people emailing me wanting me to do it for them? And the thing that drives me crazy is almost every time they say, can you do this for me? I don't have the time to do it. And so I'm trying to understand that whole concept of this is a hobby. Why are people in a hurry? And why is your time more valuable than my time? I mean, I don't really want to spend my life doing fab work on chassis on a project that I've already done so that you can build one and not have to spend your time doing it, that I'm going to spend my time doing it. And I just really don't have any interest in doing that. And so, long story short, I am not going to be doing fab work for other people to do these projects. And if you don't have time, or you don't want to spend the time on doing this work yourself, you might want to think about what you're even doing and why you're doing this. I mean, if you don't enjoy doing this work and you don't enjoy spending time on a hobby, why have a hobby? And if your end goal is simply to have some amplifiers to listen to, and you don't really enjoy this whole building process, just pony up and buy some, $3,000, $4,000 amplifiers and go listen to music and not have this as a hobby. And so I guess that's just a little rant on my not understanding what people are even thinking when they say they don't have time to do this. And if you don't have the skills to do it, that's a different story. And just say it. Say, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this work. I'm not good with my hands, blah, 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 whatever reason. But don't tell me you don't have time to do it and that you want me to do it for you so you don't have to spend your time doing it. Because that just makes zero sense at all to me. So, rant for the week. We're not doing that. Anyway, I do have some other cool things on the table, and let me clean the bench off and show you what that stuff looks like. And we're back with another DIY speaker build. You probably saw the series I did on the little two-way Swan speaker that I was super impressed with. And so I decided I'm going to see what their little three-way speaker sounds like. Pretty good price. It was like $350 for a pair of them. And the really intriguing thing to me was this mid-range driver, which is like a big soft dome tweeter looking thing, which I really like the way soft dome tweeters sound and the way they have the wide dispersion angle. And so I really thought this might be a gem of a speaker, and they do get good reviews. There's a site that has some crossover upgrades or changes, and they show all the measurements and everything. And they're basically, they have one step that starts replacing all the inductors and everything, but they have kind of a stage 2 one where they replace the 3 resistors with slightly higher value ones, mainly to tone down this little ribbon tweeter. I went ahead and did those changes and used some Mills resistors, which are supposed to be really nice ones, but I went ahead and used the capacitors, the inductors, and everything that came in the kit. It comes with a nice bass port, which I like bass ported speakers, and this one actually has the little rounded, cone thing on both sides, which the two-way ones is just a straight cone, which they say can cause chuffing or something, but I haven't heard it. Anyway, got a really nice bass port. Of course, all this stuff is all pre-drilled and fabricated and everything. And then one of the things I do is I put this butyl aluminum sound deadening stuff on the inside of these MDF panels. I did the same thing on the two-way one, and then used some of this kind of wool looking white material on top of that. And so anyway, I'm probably not going to show building the cabinets on the channel because it's exactly like what I did on the previous one. And so, you know, I'm kind of getting to the point where some of this stuff is just duplicate videos. And so you can watch how I assembled those. I'm doing this one the same way, gluing these little corner blocks in place, gluing this first, then using clamps. Some people use the tape method. That works too. But anyway, going to get these built. I'm probably going to show then assembling and then go over the crossover a little bit, and then obviously do a final review on them. So I'm hoping these are going to be a little mellower, and I'm kind of tuning the crossover to be more flat frequency on these, so when I have some material that is a little brighter sounding, that I can just put these on the shelf. But there's more. And the final thing is big bottle single-ended amps. Something I've started to get really fascinated with. And I want to thank one of my viewers for sending me a pair of these 6C33 Russian tubes. These were used as the voltage regulator in the electronics of the Soviet aircraft. I think the MiG fighter jets even used these. And they're supposed to be really good sounding tubes. The other thing though is they put off a ton of heat, and they take a super long time to warm up before you can even really start listening to them. And you know, there's some downsides to that. That definitely going to have to build, you know, a chassis that's designed for heat and mount these up high. I think you put standoffs on the tube sockets so that even the tube sockets don't overheat. And then I've heard that these things have problems running them as fixed bias, that they like to thermal run away, and that it's hard to really get a good stable bias. And so people are recommending using a cathode bias, which then also puts more heat. You need like a 50-watt resistor to use with cathode bias on these things. These run at fairly low voltage with really high milliamps. And they also have a very low output impedance. So I got a pair of these 600 ohm EdCore transformers that are rated at 250 milliamps. And so the interesting thing too is these things are supposed to be pretty hard to drive. And because they have to use a fairly low grid leak resistor value to keep them from thermal running away. And so, you know, I've seen a lot of, you know, two-stage, you know, capacitor coupled things, and I don't like using two-stage front ends. You end up with the, you know, output inversed from the input, which, you know, you can fix it by hooking the speakers up backwards, but then you end up with more coupling caps in the system, and, you know, there's really no way to direct couple these. And so I saw a cool schematic where a guy used a D3A, which those tubes have gotten stupid expensive. But I'm pretty sure that there's some other 9-bottle tubes we can use. And I actually think the 6EJ7 that I'm using to drive my KT120 can be used for this tube if we use a plate choke, which I've never played with before, but I bought a pair of these a long time ago to use in a project that I never end up pursuing. So collecting the parts to build this guy, and I have a feeling this is going to be like a winter only amplifier from the heat that this thing puts off, but be like having a little space heater sitting up on the shelf. But probably going to build these as mono blocks too, given the current that these things are going to be drawing. I just feel like it makes sense to use like a single power transformer. Probably going to use solid state rectification, since we're going to have this giant choke sitting up on the top, and we're going to also have to have another choke for filtering. And I've heard that these things like a lot of filtering too, so we may have a choke on the top, one inside, you know, all that kind of stuff, Luckily, this thing runs at fairly low voltage, so we don't have to deal with all that kind of stuff, concerns with high voltage. Then we come to this guy. And this is a really oddball transmitting tube that haven't seen a lot of info about people building amplifiers with them. But the people that have say they really sound good. And it's a 4E27 transmitter tube that's kind of an oddball deal. Again, the heaters use like 7.5 amps. And from what I've seen, when these are operating, they're basically operating with the plates red plating. I mean, the plates are glowing red when the tube's running. You run about 500 volts up into this top cap, and it's got a little cooler thing that I've got a couple on the way that sit on the top of it that give it a really crazy look. This thing runs, I'm going to run them at 500 volts, maybe 550. These things could take up to, I think, 2,000 volts. But I'm just not honestly interested in working over about 550 volts in a tube amp. And it's one of the reasons I'm hesitant to work on those 800i or whatever that number is, the Wilsonton amp, because I think they're running 1,000 volts on the plate. And that's just the whole next level of being dangerous. Yes, either one of these could kill you, but 1,000 volts can like jump across and grab you without you even realizing it. You know, then you run into the weird problem is the power supply, and where do you get capacitors to filter it? Then you're using, multiple capacitors in series to handle the voltage, and just anyway, I think this is going to be crazy cool too. Again, this thing probably puts off a ton of heat. Going to have to come up with some special, might even, try some switch mode power supply. Might try it on this one too, is try a switch mode power supply for the heaters, and then see what these things will do. And I guess the fascination with these big bottles, after hearing how good that KT120 sounded, it really makes me want to try some more of these really big bottle tubes and see what kind of single-ended power we can get out of those. Plus, both of these are be fairly unique projects, especially this 4E27. I don't think anybody's built one of these that I've seen on YouTube, and honestly, I haven't been able to find a whole lot. I think I found one amp that a guy built using these, and he was running them like way underrated from what they can do, and it was only making about 10 watts of power. To me, it's kind of like, why bother if you're not going to really push the envelope of what one of these things can do? So anyway, I think this is a good point to wrap up the Monday monologue, trying to catch up on kind of where my head's at and what's been going on. I'm sorry again for a couple of weeks of not having any video uploads, but had the computer problems, and it just felt like a nice little end of the summer break before we dive into our stuff. So next definitely is going to be the KT120 build. Get that finished up. Probably going to work on the R300 and then jump into some new projects. So anyway, hope you're enjoying my channel. If you are, please subscribe. Thanks to you Patreon folks for your support as well as the donations. Like the user that donated these tubes to me, thank you. And also gave me the sockets, which is awesome. So anyway, thanks again for all you guys that are helping me with the channel. And we'll see you soon for another Monday monologue.